Thank you, Chairman Bishop, for holding the hearing and for allowing us to participate. I'm pleased to appear before your subcommittee to introduce H.R. 3311, the Provide Access and Retain Continuity Act, or the PARC Act as it's become known. And again, thank you for considering this legislation. And to the witnesses, thank you for being and participating as well. When the federal government shut down in October of this last year, it seemed as if the administration used all of the lessons, frankly, from years of Chicagoland-style politics to do what they could to make this shutdown as painful for as many people as possible. It's estimated that Utah tourism suffered something like $30 million losses due to the federal shutdown. Now, tourism provides roughly 40% of the employment in southern Utah, which I happen to represent. And as a side note, I would recognize that the reason that it's such an important employer in that part of the state is one of the primary reasons is due to the fact that the federal government has shut off nearly all access to the invaluable resources that are available in those lands. Because of this, businesses and communities were hard hit by the government shutdown. In Utah, there are 5 national parks, 7 national monuments, 2 national recreation areas, 6 national forests. In fact, 70% of my state is controlled by the federal government, as I'm sure the Lieutenant Governor may mention in his testimony. The state of Nevada is 84% controlled by the federal government. In Idaho, Alaska, and Oregon, the federal government controls something like 50%. In California, Wyoming, Arizona, and New Mexico, it's over 40%. Now, all of this is to say that if the administration wants to make a shutdown painfully felt, it's very easy for them to do that. In the West, where there's so much federal land, it's detrimental not only to tourism, but to other industries such as mining and timber and transportation and cattle production. All of them were impacted by this as well. This is not a situation that we welcome in the West. You know, be very honest, we would wish we controlled more of our land, such as they do in the East, but that's not the case. But whether you're from the West or the East, the recent federal shutdown with its closure of public lands constitute a loss of billions of dollars in business revenue around the nation. And I've proposed the PARC Act to allow states, territories, and even the District of Columbia to enter in agreements with the Department of Interior to keep economically important federal facilities open during a potential shutdown in the future. Now, I note that some have called this a doomsday scenario, but I think it's wise for us to prepare for an eventuality such as that. If we keep savings in our personal finances as families, that's not because we're doomsday, that's because we want to be prudent and careful, and I think this is a similar situation. These agreements would be in place and could not be altered as a result of just the political vicissitudes, and they would allow for continued operation of public lands and for an avenue for which the government has reopened and states can be compensated for expenditures on the behalf of the federal government. And finally, let me just end with this. If you love the national parks as I do, and if you want to keep the national parks open, as I do, and if you think it's a good idea to prepare for an uncertain future, if you want to protect small businesses and rural communities, as I do, and finally, if you think it's a bad idea for the federal government to have such power over the states, as I do, then this is a good bill. It does all of these things, and for that reason, I ask for your support, and I encourage its passage. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would yield back my time.
Thank you. We'd now like to turn to Lieutenant Governor Cox from the state of Utah and recognize you for 5 minutes to talk specifically about the Stewart bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Ranking Member Mr. Grijalva. It's a pleasure to be here on behalf of the state of Utah. Governor Gary Herbert sends his apologies. He would prefer to be here, but is otherwise engaged at the time. Mr. Stewart, Congressman Stewart has very eloquently stated the position of the state of Utah, and I don't wish to tread upon his remarks in any way, but I would like to maybe pull back the curtain just a little bit, if I could, in the happenings that kind of led to this. During the shutdown, as has already been stated, the results were devastating for the small rural towns and cities surrounding our national parks. And we felt that very severely throughout the state. When we were reaching for solutions to that, Governor Herbert made a call to Secretary Jewell, and I really can't state forcefully enough the importance of that personal relationship. Two people who do not always see eye to eye, but have worked very diligently to have a personal relationship. And so when that call was made, the Secretary was very willing to talk. I can tell you that at the end of the day, this was on a Wednesday after the parks had been closed for several days. We were coming up on Columbus Day weekend, which is one of the biggest weekends in the fall time of our national parks, and we were very concerned about the economic devastation that was taking place. At the close of the day on Wednesday, we thought there was no way a deal could be done. On Thursday morning, Secretary Jewell called back and said, I think we can make this happen. By Thursday night, we had a deal in place. It was a real testament, again, to personal relationships. It was a testament to what can happen when we put aside our personal prejudices and work together. It was, I believe, a real triumphant example of leadership within a red state and with Secretary Jewell. And I'm very pleased at the results of that as we've seen the positive effects of that effort. What this bill is attempting to do, I think, is just to lay the groundwork for what has already been done. It worked. We've proven it can work. It can be done. It makes sense. It's something that the American people, the citizens of my state, would hope would happen in the future, so that we don't run into these again. Again, a $30 million loss to the economy of Utah. One business in particular estimates $2 million alone. We had several businesses that were literally on the verge of closing for the year, and some on the verge of bankruptcy. Now, during that negotiation, the initial negotiation was that the state would be paid back as soon as the government was reopened. We felt like that's what we were negotiating towards. We were told that would happen, and then as things kind of wound down, we were told that the attorneys said that was not possible because of the Anti-Deficiency Act, but that they fully expected that we would have no problem getting Congress to get us the money back when that was over. I realized the joke was on us, right? In fact, we were told, the Interior told us they would draft the language to make sure that happened. So there was a real spirit of collaboration, and we sincerely hope that spirit will continue forward. I know I appear to be speaking a little bit to 3286. That was not my intention, but again, the benefits of 3311. The bill is that the next time we won't have to worry about getting paid back. That would be in statute. We would be able to make sure that happened. I would just close with a little story, if I could. I had a young man that I was very close to who found himself in some financial trouble. He hesitantly asked me if I could help him, and I did that, told him not to worry about paying me back. A few months later, he came with the money in hand. I said, I told you not to worry about it. He said no, and I said, well, why? He said, because it's the right thing to do. I know that may be asking a little too much of this Congress, but it is the right thing to do, and we would sure appreciate your support. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back my time.
Yes, again, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Make sure your mic's on and you're talking into it.
Yes, is that better?
Better.
Is this even better?
Personally, I like it.
Mr. Schaefer, if I could spend just a little time with you, sir, recognizing that you represent the National Park Service. I guess to attain your position, you've been with the parks for many years, I'm guessing. Is that true?
Over 40, yes.
Over 40 years. And I'm guessing you've spent some time in Washington.
All 40 years.
All 40 years.
Yes.
Really, I didn't expect that. Well, that tells me you know a little bit about politics then. And in your 40 years here, you've seen a number of government shutdowns. True?
I've seen two of consequence, and then there was a very brief one in 2011, but the ones that affected us were 95, 96, and the most recent one. Yes.
Yes, I appreciate that. And they were the ones that most people remember, there's no doubt. But I'm sure that you know, and I won't ask the question because I know you know this, that, and some of those were caused by Republicans when the Republicans were held in power, but some of them were caused by Democrats when the Democratic Party was the party in power. And I'll ask you a rhetorical question, but I'd like your response. Would you be willing to bet your life savings that the government will never shut down again?
I would not, of course.
Thank
Under
you.
these circumstances, I would not.
Yeah, I don't think...
No, you said it was a rhetorical question.
Yeah, I don't think any of us would be willing to bet that, because we know that we hope that it doesn't, but politics being what it is, it's happened before more than once or twice. It's happened more than a dozen times, and it might happen again, as much as many of us would like to avoid that. And I guess the essence of my question then is, if that were to happen again, and in fact not if, but when it happens again, I think many of us would say, wouldn't we want to be prepared to keep our national parks open in that eventuality? And as I read your testimony, I have to tell you that I'm not convinced by the reasonings that the National Park Service has put forward in their objections to this bill. In fact, I'm kind of puzzled by it, because it seems to me that our objectives in this is the same. You would like to keep the parks open. I would like to keep the parks open. We're trying to find the best way to do that. And it seems to me, and I would like your answer to this, it seems to me what the Park Service is saying, we don't want to do it because it's hard or because it's going to be expensive. But in comparison to the cost and the cost not just in dollars but in human cost, it seems like it's worth doing. Could you give me your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, to be clear, that the position represented here is the administration's position on the issue. And that is, I think, a reflection that they do not want to have one-off solutions to stopgap in the event of another lapse of appropriation. And I think that was reflected in decisions that were made throughout this past shutdown. So it's not solely an issue regarding the National Park Service, and raising it to a higher level.
And I understand that, and I understand and will concede the point. This is not a perfect solution, but it's a much better solution, in my opinion, and in the opinion of many of us, than doing nothing or not preparing for this eventuality, which most of us agree will come. Mr. Cox, if I could turn to you for just a minute, sir. Would you elaborate just a little more on some of the benefits that you think occurred to the states, and particularly to the rural communities, many of which are stressed? And many of them are stressed because of the point I made in my opening statement about the fact that the federal government has, in many cases, cut off access to just enormous swaths of land, and the resources and the jobs that would be created from that. And I've left you nearly a minute, but help us understand what good benefits came because your governor and you and the administration, and to her credit, the secretary, and I'm so grateful she was willing to do this, to her credit, working with the state and in a fashion to reopen the national parks very quickly.
Thank you, Representative Stewart. As prior to serving as Lieutenant Governor, I had the opportunity to serve as County Commissioner for 4 years, and deeply knowledgeable when it comes to the impacts that our federal lands have on small, local, rural communities. I come from a town of 1,200 people, where I'm raising my family, and the impacts are very serious. We're again talking about 70% of the state of Utah is covered with federal lands and public lands. And so this was one instance where we were able to work together. The impacts were very real, were very severe, to the tune, again, of millions of dollars, impacting very small communities that don't have that type of, as Mr. Cisa said, that don't have those type of margins. This is for Southern Utah especially, as the weather starts to cool, this was the time when people spend their time in our national parks. And not just the citizens of Utah, not just the citizens of the United States, but across the world.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.